Dr. Daniel Mitchell had delivered hundreds of babies in his career. Some doctors claimed that experience dulled the excitement of childbirth, turning it into routine procedure. But for Dr. Mitchell, every birth carried a weight of significance, a profound moment where new life broke through the threshold of existence. St. Anne's Hospital bustled with the usual late-night hum. The maternity ward was a pocket of controlled chaos. Nurses moving swiftly, soft beeping of monitors, the occasional cry of a newborn filling the air. Lisa Reynolds was settled in room 304, her belly full with the weight of impending motherhood. Her pregnancy had been smooth, almost eerily so. No complications, no morning sickness, barely any discomfort at all. It was something the nurses half-jokingly called a storybook pregnancy. But Lisa had confided something to Dr. Mitchell at her last appointment, something that still lingered in the back of his mind. Before we move forward, if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring and educational stories. "I keep having these dreams," she had said, her fingers unconsciously resting on her belly. "I dream that the baby is talking to me, not in baby sounds, like full sentences." Dr. Mitchell had chuckled at the time, brushing it off as normal pregnancy anxiety. It's common for mothers to feel a deep connection to their baby before birth. Your subconscious is just filling in the blanks. But Lisa hadn't looked convinced. "It doesn't feel like my subconscious," she had murmured. "It feels real." Tonight, as Dr. Mitchell prepared for another delivery, those words returned to him. It was an irrational thought, but something about her voice that day had left an impression. He shook it off. He had a job to do. Lisa lay on the hospital bed, her dark hair matted slightly to her forehead with sweat. Despite her exhaustion, she smiled weakly as Dr. Mitchell entered the room. "Well, Lisa, it looks like tonight's the night," he said, offering a reassuring nod. She chuckled breathlessly. "About time. I feel like I've been pregnant forever." Beside her, Lisa's husband, Mark, squeezed her hand. "She's been saying she wants this baby out for weeks," he said, attempting a light-hearted tone, though nervousness flickered in his eyes. Nurse Emma, one of the more experienced members of the team, adjusted the fetal monitor. "Maybe the little one's just waiting for the perfect moment," she said playfully. "Who knows? Maybe your baby has something important to say." Dr. Mitchell glanced at her sharply, caught off guard by the remark. It was just an innocent joke, yet it sent an involuntary shiver down his spine. He busied himself with reviewing Lisa's vitals. Everything was normal. There was no reason for unease. "All right," he said, clearing his throat. "You're about 8 centimeters dilated. We're almost there." Lisa took a deep breath, her grip tightening on Mark's hand as another contraction rolled through her. The monitors beeped rhythmically, tracking the steady progress of labor. Emma gave Lisa an encouraging smile. "Won't be long now. Just a few more pushes, and you'll be holding your little one." Lisa exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting toward the dim hospital room's ceiling. "I just hope he's okay," she whispered. "I keep feeling like something is different about him." Dr. Mitchell glanced at her, noting the way her expression shifted from excitement to uncertainty. "What do you mean?" he asked, keeping his voice calm and measured. Lisa hesitated, as if debating whether to share her thoughts. "In my dreams," she said finally, "he tells me things. Strange things. Things a baby couldn't possibly know." Mark rubbed her shoulder soothingly. "Honey, you're just tired. Your mind's been working overtime these last few weeks." She nodded but didn't look convinced. Instead, she turned her gaze toward Dr. Mitchell. "Do you think it's possible?" she asked. "For a baby to know things before they're even born?" Dr. Mitchell offered a small, reassuring smile. "Babies are full of surprises. But don't let your imagination get the best of you. Let's focus on a safe delivery, and soon, you'll be able to hold him yourself." Lisa exhaled, forcing a weak smile. "You're right. I'm probably just overthinking it." Still, the uneasy feeling in the room remained. lingering just beneath the surface like an unspoken secret. The minutes ticked by. The contractions grew stronger. The delivery team prepared for the final stage of labor. Dr. Mitchell stood at the foot of the bed, his hands gloved, ready to bring Lisa's baby into the world. And yet, despite the routine nature of it all, despite the countless deliveries he had assisted with over the years, he couldn't shake the whisper of unease curling in his gut. Something about this birth felt different. Something he couldn't quite explain. As Lisa let out a sharp cry and the baby's head finally began to emerge, Dr. Mitchell took a steadying breath, pushing away his doubts. But deep down he knew this was no ordinary delivery. The air in the delivery room was thick with anticipation. The beeping monitors provided a rhythmic backdrop to Lisa's deep, labored breaths. Mark stood beside her, his face pale but resolute, his hand gripping hers tightly. Dr. Mitchell positioned himself carefully, his hands steady, his mind focused. The years of experience had prepared him for moments like this, yet a strange sense of unease lingered in his gut. Lisa let out a final, exhausted cry as the baby entered the world. And then, silence. The usual, reassuring wail of a newborn never came. Instead, an eerie stillness settled over the room, pressing in like a heavy fog. The nurses exchanged uneasy glances. Mark's grip on Lisa's hand tightened, his knuckles white. Lisa's chest heaved as she gasped for breath, her sweat-drenched face searching for reassurance. Dr. Mitchell's pulse quickened. It wasn't uncommon for a newborn to take a moment before crying, but something about this silence felt different. A strange chill slithered up his spine. "Sometimes they take a second," he said, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Let me check." The baby boy lay still in Dr. Mitchell's hands. His tiny chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, his skin pink and warm, yet there was no sound from him. No cry of protest, no wail of life. His eyes remained closed, as if he were somewhere between worlds. Emma, the seasoned nurse, moved swiftly, retrieving a bulb syringe to clear the baby's airways. Another nurse, Harper, prepared the oxygen mask just in case. The tension in the room crackled like static electricity. Lisa's exhausted voice broke through the quiet. "Is he okay?" Dr. Mitchell forced a reassuring smile. "He's breathing, Lisa. Give him a moment." But the weight in his chest only deepened. He had seen newborns hesitate before taking their first breath, but never like this. The baby felt warm, alive, but the absence of sound, the complete stillness, was unnerving. He carefully rubbed the baby's back, coaxing him to respond. A second passed, then another, and then the baby's tiny eyes snapped open. A collective breath hitched in the room. Newborns didn't open their eyes so soon. Not like this. Not with such startling clarity. The infant's gaze was sharp, unsettlingly aware. His dark eyes locked onto Dr. Mitchell's with an intensity that sent an unexpected chill through the seasoned doctor. It was as if he were seeing something beyond the physical world, something hidden from the rest of them. A flicker of something unreadable passed over the baby's face before his lips parted. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Then, at last, a cry broke the silence. The spell shattered. The tension released in an instant as the room filled with the high-pitched wail of a newborn, raw and piercing. The nurses let out quiet sighs of relief. Mark laughed shakily, tears brimming in his eyes. Lisa's head fell back onto the pillow, exhausted but smiling. Dr. Mitchell exhaled slowly, masking the lingering unease coiled in his chest. "Strong set of lungs," Emma murmured, trying to lighten the mood. Dr. Mitchell nodded, but his fingers trembled slightly as he handed the baby to Lisa. She cradled her son with reverence, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. Mark wrapped an arm around them both, his joy evident. "He's perfect." But as Dr. Mitchell stepped back, observing the family's tender moment, he couldn't shake the lingering sensation that something unseen had just shifted in the room. The baby's gaze had felt knowing. He dismissed the thought as exhaustion playing tricks on him. And yet, deep down, he knew something was different about this child. Dr. Mitchell had been trained to handle unexpected moments in the delivery room, but nothing in his years of experience had prepared him for this. The baby had just let out his first cry, finally breaking the eerie silence that had gripped the room. Lisa and Mark were visibly relieved, their exhaustion giving way to pure joy as they gazed down at their newborn son. But Dr. Mitchell couldn't shake the unsettling sensation that had taken root in his chest. The way the baby had opened his eyes, so focused, so eerily aware, was unlike anything he had ever witnessed before. As he moved to stimulate the baby further, his gloved hands carefully adjusting the newborn's tiny limbs, the infant's crying suddenly stopped. The room fell into an unnatural stillness once more. The only sounds were the faint beeping of the monitors and the muffled hum of activity from the hallway outside. And then, the baby's eyes snapped open. A gasp caught in Dr. Mitchell's throat. Those eyes, deep, dark, and impossibly knowing, stared directly into his own. It was not the blank, unfocused gaze of a newborn. It was something more, something aware, something old. Nurse Emma, standing beside him, shifted uneasily. "Doctor," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Dr. Mitchell swallowed hard, forcing himself to respond. "He's just adjusting," he murmured, though even he wasn't convinced by his own words. And then it happened. The baby's lips parted, his tiny mouth forming shapes that no newborn should be capable of forming. And in a hoarse, whispery voice, one that seemed far too deep, too burdened with knowledge for such a small being, he spoke. "He is coming back." A cold wave swept through the room. Emma let out a sharp inhale and took an instinctive step back. Harper, the other nurse, dropped the oxygen mask she had been holding. Lisa, cradling her child in her arms, stiffened. Mark's face drained of color, his grip tightening protectively around his wife's shoulders. Dr. Mitchell stood frozen in place, his pulse thundering in his ears. His rational mind struggled to process what had just happened. Babies did not speak. It was impossible. Newborns lacked the vocal control, the brain development. Every ounce of medical knowledge he had told him this was absurd. And yet, he had heard it. They all had. Lisa's lips trembled. What did he just say?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mark shook his head, his expression stricken. "It must have been a sound, not actual words." "Right, Doc." His eyes were pleading, desperate for a logical explanation. Dr. Mitchell opened his mouth, but no words came out. His throat was dry, his mind spinning. How could he explain something that defied all logic? The baby, seemingly unfazed by the tension in the room, blinked up at his mother, his tiny fingers curling around the fabric of the hospital blanket. For a brief moment, he looked entirely normal, just another newborn in the world. And then his gaze shifted again, locking onto Dr. Mitchell's with an intensity that sent a fresh wave of unease coursing through the doctor's veins. "He is coming back." The exact same phrase. The same whispery tone, so unnatural coming from a newborn's mouth. Lisa let out a strangled gasp, her arms tightening protectively around her child. Mark instinctively stepped between them and the rest of the room, as if shielding them from some unseen force. Emma grabbed Dr. Mitchell's arm, her fingers ice cold. "What the hell is going on?" she hissed. Her usual professional composure was gone, replaced by something dangerously close to fear. Dr. Mitchell forced himself to move, to act. He needed to regain control of the situation. It could be an anomaly," he said, though the words felt hollow. "A reflex, a sound that happened to resemble speech. Nothing to be alarmed about." But no one in the room looked convinced, least of all himself. Lisa was shaking now, her face pale. "Doctor," she whispered, her voice trembling, I told you I dreamed of him speaking to me before he was born." Dr. Mitchell felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. He remembered her words from their earlier appointments, how she had dreamt of her unborn child whispering things to her in the dark of night. Things no baby should know. His gaze flickered to the baby again, his mind racing. He is coming back. Who was he? What did it mean? The baby yawned then, a simple, innocent gesture. His tiny limbs relaxed, and his eyes drooped as if he had exerted all his energy in those two brief sentences. Within moments, he was asleep, cradled safely in his mother's arms. The eerie tension in the room remained, thick and suffocating. Harper was the first to break the silence. We should record this, she murmured. Document it. No, Dr. Mitchell's voice was firm, surprising even himself. They all turned to him, startled. No records, he said again, his pulse still racing. Nothing in the chart. Nothing on paper. We don't say anything beyond this room. Emma swallowed hard, but nodded. Harper hesitated before giving a slow nod as well. Mark was still staring at his son, his expression unreadable. Lisa simply held the baby closer, as if afraid that acknowledging what had happened would make it all the more real. Dr. Mitchell took a deep breath, then another. He needed to clear his head. He needed to think. He is coming back. The words would not leave him. As the room slowly settled, as the tension eased into an uneasy quiet, Dr. Mitchell forced himself to focus on the rational, on the science. But in the deepest corners of his mind, buried beneath years of medical training and logic, a single terrifying thought took root. What if the baby hadn't been warning them about something that would happen? What if, whoever he was already here? The sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air, mingling with the lingering tension that hung over the delivery room. For a long moment, no one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the soft whimper of the newborn, his tiny chest rising and falling in delicate, rhythmic motions. Dr. Mitchell tore his gaze away from the infant and forced himself to focus on the monitors. The baby's vitals were completely normal. His heartbeat was strong, his oxygen levels perfect, and his reflexes appropriate for a newborn. By all medical accounts, this child was just as he should be. Yet the memory of his voice, unnatural, knowing, clung to the air like an unshakable fog. The baby let out a sudden, piercing wail, an ordinary newborn's cry. The tension in the room seemed to deflate just a fraction as the familiar sound filled the space. Nurse Emma let out a slow breath, shaking her head as if trying to dislodge the memory from her mind. Babies don't talk, she said quietly, almost to herself. Harper, the younger nurse, rubbed her arms as if warding off a chill. We all heard it, she murmured. Didn't we? Dr. Mitchell exhaled, steadying himself. His rational mind screamed for control. There had to be an explanation. Stress, exhaustion, a trick of the mind. Lisa, still holding her child close, was trembling. She had gone pale, her pupils wide as if she had seen a ghost. Mark placed a protective arm around her, his own face taut with unease. Dr. Mitchell cleared his throat and spoke with as much authority as he could muster. Newborns make a variety of sounds. It's possible we misinterpreted what we heard in the moment. Emma shot him a sharp look. Misinterpreted? Doctor, that baby, she lowered her voice, as if afraid to speak too loudly, spoke. Clear as day. Harper nodded, gripping the metal railing of the hospital bed. And not just nonsense sounds. He said, Stop. Dr. Mitchell cut in, firmer this time. His eyes flickered to Lisa, who was staring down at her baby as if he were a stranger, as if she were afraid. The baby let out another cry, this one weaker, more like a newborn settling into the world. I've heard that voice before, Lisa whispered suddenly. The room went still again. Dr. Mitchell turned to her slowly. What did you say? Lisa's lips trembled. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening protectively around her son. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with something dark and unshakable. In my dreams, she said hoarsely. I've heard that voice in my dreams. A thick silence pressed against them. No one knew what to say. Mark, looking more and more distressed, turned to Dr. Mitchell. You told us pregnancy dreams were normal, that they were just subconscious anxieties. Dr. Mitchell nodded cautiously. And they are. Many expecting mothers experience vivid dreams, even ones involving their unborn child. Lisa shook her head fiercely. Not like this, she said. Not words. Not warnings. Emma frowned, her arms crossed. What exactly did you hear in your dreams, Lisa? Lisa hesitated, as if reluctant to voice it out loud. Her fingers trembled over the soft fabric wrapped around her baby. I would hear whispers, she finally said. Not like normal whispers. It was like someone was speaking directly into my mind, but I couldn't see who. Just a voice saying things I didn't understand. Harper's voice was barely above a whisper. Like what? Lisa hesitated again. Then, with a shuddering breath, she said, "He is coming back." The words landed like a slap in the silent room. Harper made an involuntary noise of disbelief. Emma muttered something under her breath. Even Mark tensed beside his wife, his fingers digging into the bed railing. Dr. Mitchell's heart pounded, but he kept his face composed. "Lisa," he said carefully, "are you absolutely sure?" She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I didn't know what it meant. I still don't. But I heard it, over and over. The baby stirred in her arms, his tiny fingers grasping at the air before settling again. He looked like any other newborn, helpless, innocent. But no one in the room could look at him the same way anymore. Emma was the first to speak after a long pause. "So what do we do?" she asked quietly. No one had an answer. Dr. Mitchell pinched the bridge of his nose, his mind scrambling for a logical course of action. Report it? But to whom? There was no protocol for this. No medical explanation that would satisfy an inquiry. "Nothing," he said at last. "We do nothing." Harper stared at him. "Nothing. We document that the baby is healthy, that the birth was normal. We don't put anything unusual in the records." He hesitated. "We didn't hear anything." "Understood." Emma's jaw tightened. "Doctor, this isn't something we can explain," he interrupted. "Not scientifically. And unless we want to risk people calling this hysteria or worse, we keep it to ourselves." He met each of their eyes in turn, silently urging them to comply. One by one, they nodded. Lisa didn't respond. She only held her child closer, rocking him gently, as if willing away the fear tightening in her chest. Mark exhaled shakily. "So what now?" Dr. Mitchell forced himself to stand tall. "Now, we let this family rest. We monitor the baby like we would any other newborn. And we don't talk about this again." The others hesitated, but finally, they began to move. Emma checking vitals, Harper gathering supplies, Mark rubbing his wife's back in silent comfort. The room slowly shifted back into the ordinary motions of post-birth care. But the unease never lifted. The questions never left. Dr. Mitchell turned one last time to Lisa and her baby. The child was quiet now, eyes closed, his breathing soft and even. Just a baby, just a newborn. And yet, as Dr. Mitchell stepped toward the door, he could have sworn he felt something watching him. He didn't dare look back. Dr. Mitchell tried to move on. He truly did. But the words wouldn't leave him. "He is coming back." It echoed in his mind during quiet moments, in the stillness of the night when he found himself staring at the ceiling instead of sleeping. The logical part of his brain screamed that it was impossible, that babies didn't talk, especially not moments after birth. But the undeniable truth remained. He had heard it. They all had. His days at the hospital continued as usual, filled with routine deliveries, checkups, and administrative duties. But beneath it all, an obsession was growing inside him. Every time he stepped into the maternity ward, he would glance toward Lisa's room, wondering if the baby would speak again, if another cryptic message would slip from his lips. By the time Lisa and her son were discharged, Dr. Mitchell had resolved to investigate. He couldn't let it go. Late that night, long after the hospital had quieted, he sat at his desk, illuminated only by the glow of his computer screen. His fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard as he typed variations of search terms. Newborns speaking at birth, babies talking immediately after delivery, supernatural newborn cases. The initial results were predictable, scientific articles debunking myths, medical explanations about newborn vocal reflexes. But as he dug deeper, past the well-documented medical sources, he stumbled upon something different. A scattering of obscure reports, buried in old newspaper clippings and internet forums. Cases eerily similar to Lisa's. There were accounts of infants speaking moments after birth, each one uttering cryptic warnings. The records were sporadic, dismissed as hoaxes, hallucinations, or exaggerations. Most of them had been brushed aside by the medical community as unreliable. But they were there, and they followed a pattern. Every few decades, somewhere in the world, it would happen again. A newborn would speak words of warning, and each time, the message was eerily familiar. Dr. Mitchell leaned in, his pulse quickening as he came across a particularly old record from the early 1800s. A midwife's handwritten account detailed a child in a rural village who had spoken upon birth, whispering something that sent shivers down her spine. "He is coming back." The doctor's breath caught. He sat back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his mouth. It wasn't just a coincidence. This had happened before. Determined, he kept searching, following the breadcrumbs of history. The more he found, the more disturbing the pattern became. Every instance of a speaking newborn coincided with strange, unexplained events, natural disasters, mysterious disappearances, even accounts of shadowy figures appearing before tragedy struck. He was so engrossed in his research that he barely noticed the vibration of his phone on the desk. When he glanced at the screen, he saw Lisa's name flashing. A sense of foreboding settled in his gut as he answered. "Lisa." Her voice was unsteady. "Doctor, I need to talk to you." The next afternoon, they met in a quiet corner of a local cafe. Lisa looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her fingers wrapped tightly around a cup of tea. Mark had stayed home with the baby, leaving her alone to speak freely. "I haven't been sleeping," she admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear it again." She swallowed hard, looking at Dr. Mitchell with haunted eyes. "But it's not just that. There's something you need to know about my family." Dr. Mitchell leaned in, his hands clasped. "Go on." Lisa hesitated, then took a deep breath. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened." A chill ran down his spine. "What do you mean?" "My family, we have a history. Strange things happen, especially around newborns. My grandmother told me stories when I was younger, things I always thought were just superstitions." She took a shaky sip of tea. "She told me that in every generation, one child is born with a message, something they're not supposed to be able to say. And every time, it's a warning." Dr. Mitchell's heart pounded. "A warning about what?" Lisa exhaled slowly. "Something coming back." The phrase sent a cold shudder through him. "I didn't take it seriously," Lisa admitted. "I thought they were just old stories. But when my baby spoke those words," she trailed off, gripping the edge of the table, "I remembered everything my grandmother told me." Dr. Mitchell felt the weight of her words pressing on him. "Do you know what it means?" Lisa shook her head. "Not exactly, but I remember my grandmother mentioning a name once." Dr. Mitchell leaned in closer. "What name?" Lisa hesitated before whispering. "The Watcher." A shiver crawled up his spine. "Who was the Watcher?" "I don't know," Lisa admitted. "But my grandmother said he, or it, returns every few centuries. And when he does, the world changes." The doctor swallowed. He had spent his life grounded in science, dedicated to logic and reason. But nothing about this was logical. Nothing about this could be explained away so easily. He glanced down at his notebook, where he had scribbled the phrase over and over. "He is coming back." Lisa watched him carefully. "Doctor, what if my baby isn't the only one? What if there are others?" The thought sent a chill through him. What if there were more warnings out there? More infants speaking in hushed voices, signaling the return of something ancient and unknown? Dr. Mitchell closed his notebook and met Lisa's gaze. "Then we need to find out what it means." Lisa nodded. "Before it's too late." The weight of her words lingered between them as the cafe hummed with life around them. oblivious to the mystery unfolding in its midst. Neither of them knew what they were stepping into, but one thing was certain. The truth was far bigger than either of them had imagined. The hospital's maternity ward was quiet, the hum of distant monitors and occasional footsteps the only sounds breaking the silence. Lisa sat in the dimly lit room, cradling her sleeping newborn. He looked so peaceful, so innocent, yet the words he had spoken echoed in her mind like an unshakable ghost. Dr. Mitchell stood by the window, lost in thought. The research he had uncovered, the stories Lisa had shared about her family's history, and the inexplicable event they had all witnessed, it all pointed to something far beyond reason. A soft knock at the door interrupted the silence. Lisa looked up as her grandmother, Eleanor, stepped in. She was a frail woman with silver hair pinned neatly back, her aged hands gripping a wooden cane. Despite her delicate appearance, there was a sharpness in her gaze, a wisdom that came from years of experience. The moment Eleanor saw the baby, her breath hitched. But it wasn't the warmth of a great-grandmother seeing her kin. It was something else entirely. Her eyes darted to Lisa, then to Dr. Mitchell, before settling back on the sleeping infant. "What's wrong, Grandma?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor didn't answer right away. She stepped closer, her cane tapping against the floor. Then, with an unsteady hand, she reached for the baby's tiny fingers. The instant they made contact, she let out a small, strangled gasp and pulled back as if burned. Lisa's stomach tightened. "Grandma." Eleanor took a deep breath, composing herself. Her gaze hardened. "It has begun again." Dr. Mitchell frowned. "What has begun?" Eleanor hesitated, glancing toward the door as if ensuring they were alone. Then, she lowered her voice. "There is an ancient prophecy in our family, one that has been passed down for generations." Lisa shivered. "Prophecy?" Eleanor nodded. "It speaks of a messenger, a child born into our bloodline once every few centuries. This child would arrive as a bearer of a warning." She looked at Dr. Mitchell. "You heard it, didn't you?" Dr. Mitchell swallowed hard. "Yes," he admitted. "We all did." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, as if in mourning. "Then there is no doubt. The warning has come." Lisa clutched her son protectively. "A warning about what?" Eleanor's expression was grim. "A force returning. One that has been locked away for a long, long time." Dr. Mitchell frowned. "Locked away? By what?" Eleanor turned to him. "Not what. Who?" Lisa's grip on her child tightened. "Who?" Eleanor sighed, sinking into the chair beside the hospital bed. "The Watcher," she murmured. "A being of immense power. Some believe it to be a guardian, others a destroyer. But the prophecy states that each time it is about to awaken, a child in our family is born with a warning." Lisa's heart pounded. "But what does he is coming back mean?" Eleanor looked at her granddaughter, sorrow deepening the wrinkles on her face. "It means the Watcher is stirring, and once fully awakened, it will either restore balance or bring devastation." A chill ran through the room. Dr. Mitchell glanced at the sleeping baby, the weight of Eleanor's words pressing heavily on him. Lisa shook her head. "But why us? Why our family?" Eleanor sighed. "No one knows. Our ancestors never discovered why, only that the warnings are always right." Dr. Mitchell's rational mind fought against the weight of this revelation, but deep down, he knew there was no denying what had happened. He had witnessed it himself. And now, Eleanor's knowledge only solidified the impossible truth. Lisa looked down at her baby. He was still sound asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Then, for just a moment, something changed. A faint smile curled at the corner of his lips. Lisa sucked in a breath. It wasn't an ordinary newborn's unconscious twitch. It was something else, something knowing. Eleanor followed Lisa's gaze, her face paling. "He understands," she whispered. Dr. Mitchell stepped forward. "What do you mean?" Eleanor's voice trembled. "He knows more than he should." Lisa felt the blood drain from her face. She had hoped, despite everything, that this was just a strange anomaly, an isolated incident. But now, with her grandmother's words confirming her deepest fears, she knew the truth. This was just the beginning. Dr. Mitchell exhaled slowly. What do we do now? Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment before answering. We prepare. Lisa swallowed. For what? Eleanor opened her eyes, and the weight of centuries seemed to rest in them. For whatever comes next. Outside, the hospital lights flickered, as if something unseen had passed through the air. And in Lisa's arms, her newborn son continued to smile, his tiny fingers curling around the edge of his blanket. And somewhere, in the unseen depths of the world, something stirred. Dr. Mitchell lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was impossible. His mind churned with everything he had learned that day. Lisa's grandmother's prophecy, the eerie smile on the newborn's face, and the words that still echoed in his ears. He is coming back. His bedside clock glowed 2:37 a.m. The hospital had long since quieted, but Mitchell's thoughts raced. Rational explanations had always been his foundation, yet nothing about this felt rational. The way Eleanor had recoiled from the baby, the certainty in her voice, the impossible truth that seemed to be unfolding before him. His phone vibrated on the nightstand, the sudden buzz making him jolt upright. He reached for it hesitantly, frowning as he saw the screen. Unknown number. A single message glowed against the darkness. He is already here. A cold shiver ran down his spine. His fingers trembled as he held the phone, rereading the words. Who had sent this? How did they know what he had been researching? Was this some kind of sick joke, or was it something much worse? Before he could react further, a sound reached him, a faint rustling outside his window. Dr. Mitchell's breath hitched. His apartment was on the 4th floor. There shouldn't be anything outside. Yet, the unmistakable sense of movement crept through the air. Slowly, cautiously, he turned his head toward the window. The streetlights outside cast long shadows, swaying gently with the trees. At first, there was nothing unusual, just the quiet stillness of the night. But then, a figure, a silhouette stood just beyond the edge of the window, barely distinguishable against the darkness. It wasn't on the fire escape, nor was it standing on solid ground. It hovered, its form shifting slightly, as if the shadows themselves conspired to keep it hidden. Mitchell's breath caught in his throat. His logical mind screamed that this was impossible. And yet, the figure moved. Slowly, deliberately, its head tilted ever so slightly to the side, as though observing him. His grip tightened on his phone. His pulse roared in his ears. He wanted to move, to run, to turn away, but he couldn't. Some unseen force held him in place, trapping him in this moment of paralyzing fear. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanished. The shadows swallowed it whole, leaving only the empty, swaying trees in its wake. Dr. Mitchell gasped, finally breaking free from his trance. His body was drenched in cold sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs. He scrambled out of bed, rushing to the window, throwing it open. He peered down into the street below. Nothing. Just the quiet city, undisturbed. He exhaled sharply, trying to convince himself that it had been a trick of the light, exhaustion playing tricks on his mind. But deep down, he knew better. He turned back to his phone, staring at the message once more. He is already here. Whoever, or whatever, had sent it knew something he didn't. And as much as he wanted to deny it, he couldn't shake the horrifying realization that settled in his gut. The warning had already come, and now it was too late. Thanks for watching. Let us know where you're tuning in from and share your thoughts on the story. We can't wait to bring you the next one. Peace out.